7, we want the withdrawal of the American military force. Wait. Hey, you're going for only half the demand. You think we only want 50%? We want everything. We want the withdrawal of the American military force from our communities and an end to the sexual abuse of women. Number 8, we want freedom for all political prisoners. Wait, I keep telling you. You're going for half the man. We want it all, I said. We want freedom for all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and an end to the sexual brutalization and torture enforced on sisters by prison officials. We want a true education of our story as women. We believe in the right to defend ourselves against rapes, beatings, muggings, and general abuse. So now tell me, is that a program we can live with for today? That was part of the revolution within the revolution that we were talking about. And a number of the sisters talked about our international perspective. That phrase came from the Cuban Revolution. Fidel Castro gave a speech in 1966 where he talked about the role of the Cuban woman in advancing the revolutionary society. And so he said how the role of women was integral, that you cannot advance a society without advancing women. You cannot. I'm going to close. I want to say one last thing, which
Por
is...
favor. Go ahead.
Now I forgot what I was going to say. Give me a second, sorry. So what I really wanted to say is that all that we did, it continues. Because as Gloria mentioned, this is part of a continuum and our struggle continues. And I never lost faith because I believe in the power of the people. Power of the people.
Okay, guys, let me just tell you that we had to find the 12-point program of the Women's Union and put it upstairs after that speech. So Iris Morales is responsible for that piece of information. You can actually see it on the exhibit in the Women's Wall, the 12-point program of the Women's Union. It is quite inspiring. I would like to acknowledge, on behalf of Holly Block and the museum, the Speaker of the City of New York, who is here in the house, Melissa Mark Viverito. And also, Council Member Rosie Mendez is with us this evening. Okay, we don't want you to go anywhere. We are going to hear brief comments from our invited guests, Cookie and Marta. And then we're going to open it up for discussion. Cookie.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank the panel for inviting me up here. And I'd like to thank the panel for inviting me up here. And I joined the party in 1970 as well. And I, too, was lost, and I found a purpose in joining the Young Lords, and very proud to have been a Young Lord. I was wondering, what could I say? I didn't do anything very important in the party, but as I started to think about it a little bit more, I'm cadre, and it was my job to pound the streets and sell Pa'lante, our newspaper. Thank you. And thanks to the Young Lords, I'm an expert today at making ensalada de bacalao. Because I had to feed the party.
Cookie, that's where we work together.
Thank you, thank you.
When we joined and became cadres, instead of being asked to do more outside work, we were asked to go in the kitchen. Our job was to cook together.
That's right.
We cooked for the collective.
And my highlight, when we took over the church on 110th Street, I remember when Jane Fonda came that day, I was her bodyguard for the day. Thank you.
I'll just say a few words. I joined the Young Lords when what we had in terms of branches were the Chicago branch and El Barrio, and did work through the transition into what became the Young Lords Party. I was one of the first women that was in the Ministry of Defense, and also, worked alongside some very large men sometimes with very large attitudes. I was 5'0". I'm now 4'11", so shrinking as you see me. But I think that was one of the really big battles, was to integrate women into, or to have women within the Ministry of Defense, and also that the idea that defense incorporated many things. That beyond security, there was also preparing for marches. That there were many things that we as part of that ministry had to do in terms of knowing the streets and the buildings and the communities that we worked in, and that we would be marching through. And in addition to as Minerva indicated, simply often traveling with Central Committee members to different areas. And particularly for me, I did have the experience of traveling with them, when we went to those branches that say, along the East Coast that did become subsequent Young Lords branches. The other thing that I think, is really important for me to share is that, as Johanna mentioned, I'm Dominican. And, the fact that there was no question that as a Dominican, I would be part of, this organization that was largely Puerto Rican. Number one, I did come from a very activist family. I had a brother who recruited many members into the movement pro-independence, and simply to work towards, the pro-independence movement. So, we recognized, just simply as people of color and as other Caribbean folk, that, it was important not to, not to continue this colonial presence where Puerto Rico could be held up by a U.S. government as this supposedly example to, other Caribbean countries. So, that's one point that I think is very important. The other thing is that it was really a time of incredible solidarity. so that, as a Dominican, as, African American, as Venezolana, Colombiana, whatever, and every combination, we had every combination of Puerto Rican, Hawaiian Puerto Rican, Cuban Puerto Rican, every hyphenated, family history that you could have was present there. And that we, as I said, it was about the fact that this was our struggle, not only in terms of independence for Puerto Rico, but also in terms of a community struggle. My family came first during the 40s and 50s. So, my streets were, the streets that were largely Puerto Rican and African American. And so we grew up together and recognized that this is a common struggle that we all needed to be involved in and to grow with. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is that I did come from a family of very strong women. My mother and my grandmother were both examples of very non-traditional women. So not necessarily from a political point of view, but certainly very organically strong, who took particular positions. And so that one of the things that attracted me to the Young Lords was the presence of strong women. And when you see the fight that's here, when you see, Iris and Denise in particular, who really provided a leadership for, most of the women coming, or actually, all of the women and the young men coming into the organization. So that to me was something that was very attractive in terms of this is an organization that I want to be a part of. I came in at age 19, so I was one of the adults in the group. And that's the other thing. I think we've all talked about the fact that we were so young. And it took us looking back, it takes us looking back that, when we read and think about what we did and what we wrote, it really is sort of, I don't know. I asked myself, how did we do this and why did we do it and what? But I think it's the sense, the immediacy of struggle, the immediacy of this has to be done. And I think, I want to really, as Iris and all of the panels indicated, we are, even though this is 45 years later, we are within that same sense of this has to be done. Because, and I guess I have to be finished. I do want to say one last thing. I do want to say that, it really, for the women and the men of the Young Lords, that this really was a struggle from the heart. We really did, feel like we are working, towards revolution. We're working for a new society, but we're also working for ourselves, and for those that would follow.
Okay, the last person we're going to hear from before we open it up for questions, a few at least, is Wilma Gonzalez. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I am very proud to, I wasn't expecting to speak. I'm very proud to be sitting on a stage with these wonderful women. I joined the Young Lords very young, maybe one of the older young people. I was a member of the Puerto Rican Student Union, which also produced a newspaper called Maceta, and our motto was Rifle, Cañón, Escopeta, Nuestro Pueblo se respeta.
Yeah.
As a member of PRSU, I'm very proud to say that we as students as Latinos, we were responsible for and on the right side of history. As a result of our struggles, open admissions was implemented. We have Black and Puerto Rican studies. There were a number of struggles that we initiated and took part of. There were a lot of administration buildings that we took over. It wasn't an easy struggle, but it's one that to this day I don't regret. If I had to do it all over again, I would.
Thank you. We're going to open it up for one or two questions before we wrap it up tonight. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I consider you the real.
Take the mic because we're filming.
No, I can talk.
No, we're filming. We're filming.
Okay, thank you again. I consider you the real Wonder Women. So, thank you. My question is something that a couple of you have already touched on. I believe Gloria mentioned it about the love and respect you have to have for each other. And I know Marta was talking about it towards the end of working for each other. So if you can just kind of share briefly an example of that. What was that love? What was an actual action of love, either for yourselves as women or self-love or, you know, love and respect for the men and how they gave that back to you?
Okay, before we continue, I think we should take one or two questions to let the audience speak. And
Yes.
maybe one of you can write it down. And then you can come back. Yes, our next question.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for the panel. This actually comes from a comrade who was not able to be here because of capitalism. But I'll just go ahead and read her question. This question is directed for Denise, but anybody can open up to it. You described being disciplined with violence by these men. How did you survive that? What do you say to yourself at the moment to get through it and to work to transform this group instead of leaving it? Thank you.
Okay, example of love.
I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things I think is that you really have to get the there really was this sense of, even though we criticize each other, we need to respect each other. So, it's sort of like, I think we treated each other really like family. Mm-hmm. It's like if you did something wrong, and I'm going to call you out on it, which we did in meetings and, in whatever way it needed to be done, but then you don't have, afterwards, it's about working that out, and it's about really working for the goals of the organization. And so that if we're talking about remaking ourselves as people and, making each other better, that once I, call you out on an action or criticize you or you criticize me, that there's no hard feelings after that. That we need to continue working in the spirit of, we're going to respect each other. And we really did work hard at that. I mean, there was some, the issue with really bringing women into all levels of the organization and all of the ministries, that was no easy fight. I mean, that was serious. It took a lot of organizing, a lot of talking, but it also, took, simply being firm and seeing this is what has to happen. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Olguie and then Iris.
As I said before, we used the forum of general meetings with criticism and self-criticism. There was a policy, because you can't fight for socialism if you don't have love in your heart. You really can't. So the policy of love was generated through the ideas of changing a society that was oppressive to a society that's non-oppressive. That means that we loved each other enough to help each other heal from the infection that Iris spoke about, from the infection of the ideas that were perpetuated in a society that wanted to cripple us. So we can't continue to cripple ourselves. Criticism and self-criticism was to be constructive. It was to be useful, effective, not to put somebody down so you could be one up. And that's how we dealt with it. As for showing love, every single day there was a sign of love. You're tired, my friend, let me take over. You got a dirty house, let me clean it for you. You need something to eat, we got it. We lived in collectives. We had a collective-minded group of people. It wasn't about me, myself, and I, and whatever I want, and I want it now. It was, you know what, we got to work hard, and we got to support each other, because nothing's going to happen if we end up being each other's enemy. Now, the essence of transformation and identifying who's genuine and who's not genuine is something that everyone in any movement has to learn, to be discerning. To look, who are the agents provocateurs who are provoking? Who are the weak links that are allowing the provoking? Who are the people who are talking a good game but ain't living it? Because when you look at that, then you know where your weak links are, and you know who are your friends and who are your enemy. We also learned that because we read a lot of Marx and Lenin, we read a lot of Enver Hoxha, we read Mao Zedong of the yin yang, every works. And we applied it. Those who were genuine applied it. And that's why many of us are sitting on this stage still feeling the passion for socialism, to end capitalism.
There's a real question there in terms of violence. And I think that not to talk about this aspect of it would be to be romantic and fantasy-like, because what is spoken about in terms of the Young Lords is usually the first 2 years, but the organization actually went for 5 years. And the reason that this question of violence is important is because things can turn into their opposite. And if we don't speak the truth, we're bound to live a lie. And what happened at a certain point, the incident that Denise described, which was actually in the scheme of things, was the beginning of a germ that then later infected the organization. Because as all of the women have pointed out, we were in a time where we felt that we were at war. And there was a real sense that we were at war. Remember, the FBI was keeping tabs on Martin Luther King. Remember that Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist. Remember that the Black Panther Party members were being killed. Fred Hampton was killed in his bed. So we had infiltrators within the organization, and their job was to destroy our organization, but not just our organization, the whole movement. The whole movement. And we already talked about how young, we had our own internal contradictions, and we were vulnerable. And toward the end, certain people took control and even committed violent, vile acts against members. And we're hoping, I would want to in my lifetime at least know who those individuals were. If not, we have to know that they've existed in every social movement. You look El Grito de Lares, ¿qué pasó ahí? Every movement that is making change and touching the hearts of people and bringing crowds like this and more is going to be subjected to the police. We probably have some informants right here. But I appreciate the question from the brother about the violence because it was a germ that then became a plague.
I want to go back and answer, though. I'm going to go back, and that's right on. And to be very honest, we all had very hard times after. And I always say that a lot of us have suffered from post-revolutionary stress disorder. And no,
That's true.
I'm
Very
not.
true.
I'm not. That's serious. And we've had to work through. Each of us has had to do things to work through those results. But I want to go back to the whole business of discipline in the sisters, because we had referenced some Greek play, Lysistrata, or Lysistrata. And we made a decision because we had, we defined relationships in the organization as the person that you were partnered with was your significant other, your SO, because we didn't like these other terms of, my man and my lady and my woman and my this, all of that. So we had SOs and our significant other. And it was really rough because you're standing being disciplined by your significant other, and you sit there and you're like, oh yeah? Okay. We got together and we had a meeting and we decided that we were going on significant other strike. We did. I remember telling a certain person, socialism stops right here. I don't remember that. Oh, I shouldn't do that. But the point is that we decided that women had to make a stand, and you have to set boundaries in relationships, and that it's not about, yes, we were young people and we had hormones, we had sex. No, seriously. Because people are afraid to ask about things like that. And, a lot of us were like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And we were living in these pads, these apartments together, communally, collectively, and we paired up. We weren't allowed to mess around. There were rules. But we decided that if brothers were going to use their defense, physical capacity to oppress us, then they weren't getting none. And it worked.
My name is Carlitos Rovira, and I'm a former member of the Young Lords Party. And being that there are virtually no male young lords here, only me and my brother over there, it's important for people to get the perspective of the male perspective of the role of the women in the Young Lords. I can tell you that this is not an act. I trusted these sisters with my life. When you talk about leadership, they were very exemplary at the word. There were mistakes, because all revolutionary movements make mistakes. That is a given. But the sisters, when they entered the organization, when they took the realms of leadership, it became a quantum, an internal political quantum of the organization. There was something new that was added. there was a new direction, and there was a new perspective on the role of women. And how is it that men cannot be revolutionary unless they pick up the banner of women's liberation as their own? I also like to